Hi, everybody, and welcome to the past tense panel. My name is Jen Jumba. I am a librarian at Cleveland Public Library, and today I'll be moderating this panel. And as a librarian and educators, I think we can all agree that there's a very special relationship that we have with writers. So being able to meet them, to hear more about their craft, to get to know them as human beings endears them to all of us. And then it makes it even easier for us to find that perfect reader for their book. So I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Cleeton, author of the Cuban Heiress by Berkeley, Sophie Mackintosh, Cursed Bread by Doubleday, Mary Monroe, Love, Honor, Betray by Defina, Lisa Scottoline, Loyalty by Putnam Adult, and Alyssa, fellow librarian Wees of Nocturne by Del Rey. So thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. Thought I'd start with an opening question for all of you, and we'll just kind of go in alphabetical order so we're not talking over each other. If you could describe your upcoming book in 5 words, what would they be?
The Cuban Heiress is adventurous, it's romantic, it's suspenseful, twisty, and emotional.
Awesome.
I would say Cursed Bread is obsessive, surreal, textured, sinister, and passionate.
I guess I would say Loyalty is the first mafia family in the world.
Mary, I think you're on mute. Go ahead, Mary.
Okay. Love, Honor, Betray is historical, it's engrossing, entertaining, fast-paced, and it's memorable, I hope. I think it is.
Alyssa.
In 5 words, Nocturne is about a ballerina encountering magic and monsters.
Wow.
Absolutely. And I'll let you all know that I read all 5 books in 10 days. I could not put any one of them down. So
Yay.
all who are watching definitely have to float these all to the top of your TBR pile for sure.
Great.
I'm muted. I knew I was going to do that.
Right. I thought it was just me.
Okay, so sorry. So we'll start with Chanel. Can you talk a little bit about your background and education in international politics and how that influences the stories that you tell?
I've always been really passionate and interested about kind of the intersection between the personal and the political. And with my undergrad in international relations and my master's in global politics, I really kind of loved that research of going back and looking at how history informs the present. And so being able to write about these kind of stories is really just an extension of that interest. And it's been so amazing as a Cuban American to really look at that intersection of personal and political as it has played out in my own life and kind of my family's experiences leaving Cuba after the revolution, and to be able to go through history and see kind of those echoes in the past that I think are really powerful in informing historical fiction.
Absolutely. I was just struck by that, and the fact that that's your background too has to make it even more compelling when you go back to do the research, because you weren't around during particular time periods in which you're writing. So
it definitely makes the research a lot of fun and very fascinating. I kind of can get, very much buried in it and just want to spend all my time reading about the past and those things. So definitely a fun part of the job.
Absolutely. I would imagine for all of you that that's a big appeal, is the research that goes into it, and probably, sadly, the stuff that doesn't quite make it into the books that you become incredibly spellbound by. All right, let's look at Sophie. Cursed Bread, right, is set in a small town in southern France in which there was a mass poisoning, and to date, it has not been solved. So when did you first come across this story, and what made you want to write about it?
So I think I came across this story actually years and years ago. It was one of those things that I think I scrolled past it on Twitter. It was a sort of stranger than fiction, one of those like, "Ooh, you'll never guess what happened in this strange village in like 1951." And I remember reading it and thinking it was so fascinating, but there wasn't really much written about it. And I was writing another book at the time, and I kind of thought it'd be so great if someone, wrote this book, and I kind of filed it away. And it was always there ticking away, and I ended up kind of coming back to it because as it was kind of there in my mind, I started to think of a few more kind of options for what could have happened. And some of the theories about what happened were, they were really, really kind of off the charts. They were very outlandish. And I went with the most outlandish in the end because I just thought, it was so much stranger than fiction. If that actually had happened, like what would that mean? So yeah, it was kind of something ticking away for a long time.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought it to light, because that's the great thing about reading your books is I'm more aware of events that happened that I wouldn't have otherwise known about, right? Obviously, I missed the tweet on Twitter that captured your attention, but thankfully was able to read far more than 280 characters in this incredibly compelling book about what may have happened. So thank you for that gift. Let's talk to Mary. Your upcoming.
Hi, yeah. I'm from a very, very poor family. I'm the first and only member to even graduate from high school. So, college was not in the cards for me. But I learned most of my craft. I learned all of it by visiting libraries every chance I got, reading other authors' books, and just observing life around me. And everything I write about is related to one of my own experiences or the experiences of the people that I know. I grew up in a rural area in Alabama, and a lot of the people in my books are based on people I know, including myself.
Do they ever read your books and know that that's
Some
that
do and
book?
some don't. Some people are more interested in the blouse, whatever I had on in the book jacket photograph, or how big the letters are in my name, or the fact that I didn't dedicate the book to them, and so on and so forth. But no, my family members don't like to read. They say that, everything we need to know is in the Bible. So why bother with all these books about people who aren't even real? So that's about as far as they'll go. So that's that.
Absolutely. Alyssa, so first I want to just tell you how much I absolutely love your use of language, that there are many times as a reader that I want to just take those phrases and like tuck them into my pocket and then pull them out later and just absolutely savor them. They're just so beautifully constructed. So your upcoming book, Nocturne, is set in the 1930s in Chicago. And not only that, but you're also infusing it with a fantastical world. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to create both of those incredible scenes that are combined?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Jen. That's so nice. It makes me so happy that you connected with the language in the book. And yeah, so the book is set in 1930s Chicago, which, was kind of a bleak time for everyone. It was during the Great Depression. But my main character, Grace, she grows up in this neighborhood that's actually not there anymore. It was called Little Sicily, and it was full of, Sicilian American immigrants. And it was literally nicknamed Little Hell for the factory furnaces that would flare at night, and it would look like columns of fire. And there was this corner where in the neighborhood it was nicknamed Death Corner because it was where the mafia would leave the bodies of the people that they had killed. And so surrounded, growing up surrounded by all this death, it was just very bleak. And so the fantastical world that I've created kind of is a counterpoint to that. So Grace finds a lot of light in the darkness there. Though as the book goes on, she realizes that there's a lot of darkness in this fantasy world and a lot of light in her own world. And so she's kind of torn between the two. So it was kind of my way of exploring Grace's characters and her warring desires.
Before I get to Lisa, I just want to mention a line that just captures what you just said from your book, that it's a lie to think that darkness is cruel and nothing else. Like all things, even light, the dark has many faces, many voices, and some of them are kind. So it plays on the duality, I think, that exists between those two. And I
Yes,
think
exactly.
so I think it leads me to Lisa, because in her book, Loyalty, I think that duality also exists in terms of just the word loyalty, that it can be something that's incredibly redeeming. And at the same time, it can be something that's incredibly destructive, right? So you have these two twin brothers, you know, Franco and Roberto. Franco is bound and determined. He was born into a life of poverty, but he's bound and determined to become this self-made baron. And he'll kind of stop at nothing to achieve his goal. And I think it's the duality that exists is with Gaetano, who decides that against all else, he wants to help solve these local kidnapping cases, right? And he'll stop at nothing to achieve his goal. So can you talk a little bit more about those themes that appear in your book?
Right. Well, first, thanks for having me, and thanks to all the librarians. I feel like Mary. I grew up in a house. I mean, behind all these books now, they're all signed. It's a little English major dream, but I grew up in a house with no books at all. And my mother, who loved us, you know, but always said, "Stop reading; it will ruin your eyes." So I found books in the library and would not have this great lifelong love of books if it were not for librarians. So I always want to say that. And also I feel like I thought Chanel made such a good point. And I guess maybe because I'm such an old lady that I, you know, what are you writing and why loyalty and why now, like you said, Jen? And it's a little bit like being Italian American, I kind of wanted to answer the question, what gave rise to the mafia? I think I've written books about justice my whole life, but also I wanted to be aware that these images in the culture of Italian Americans being mafia members, mob related, it ain't great, but also I love that stuff. So I have to sort of answer for that paradox and also explore what is going on. And vis-a-vis your question about duality, it's so interesting to me because it's about both what you have when you have a dual thing like that. As Alyssa so aptly and beautifully said, I agree, you know, where is the light in the darkness? As soon as you start to talk about conflicting ideas in the same concept, you will get a dramatic wrench that people will go, that's compelling. And I think that is part of what I was going for in loyalty, where I regard myself as loyal. I'm loyal to librarians. I'm loyal to my friends. I'll be loyal to you guys. I'm really like, I'm like a love monster a little bit. But right. But when's loyalty wrong? And you want to explore the extent of it and in all of its contours. Loyalty to friends, I'm divorced twice, loyal to the spouse, to dogs, to country, to religion. And so when you start to look at loyalty and the extent to which it can do harm, then you have a really interesting idea. You take a great notion that's a virtue and you turn it on its head, or you push it too far, and then it turns into omerta, silence, and it allows the perpetration of injustice. So that wrench is what I was going for. And I think Chanel made such a great point. It really comes out of just my identity as an Italian American, that duality of culture, identifying with both, but understanding the merits of both and kind of how they operate in the popular culture. We're also lucky to be able to write in. I mean, I'm grateful for this job every day.
Absolutely. I think it ties in to Mary's book, you know, love, honor, betray, in terms of loyalty. And, you know, it's kind of told through a married couple, Jesse and Hubert, and maybe Mary, you can share a little bit more about how that loyalty is really tested, because he's loyal to two different people at the same time for two totally different reasons. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. The biggest problem with Jesse and Hubert is that they're loyal to themselves, but not to each other. And you can't have a good marriage when each person comes in with a lot of, you know, lies and everything. Everything is so flimsy because he's a liar, she's a liar. They're both leading double lives, and that never works, you know. And the other thing too is trust and honesty. if you can't trust the person that you're married to, and if you can't be honest with them, then your marriage is doomed. And in this case, their marriage was doomed, but they did redeem themselves, you know, toward the end of the book. And so the most important thing I think is that we have to be true to ourselves and to the people we love, because we want to trust them, but we also want them to trust and have faith and respect for us. And if you don't have that, you don't have much. You have more than not even a house of cards, I would say. It's going to fall apart sooner than later.
I think that was what struck me most about your book, is that your book is set in the 1930s, and
Yes.
yet that theme of loyalty and trust and faithfulness, you know, there's that whole thing, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. And that lesson is timeless. How many years later, right? Almost 100 years later, we're still struggling as human beings to trust one another, to honor one another, to, you know, not betray one another. You know, and I think that's the beauty of these books, is when I was reading them, they're all set in the past, these wonderful times and challenging times and gritty times. And at the same time, there's this universality that applies to, you know, things that we're experiencing today. And hopefully, you know, we can all kind of learn from that.
Learn from it, of course. Well, one thing I want to point out is that we know that segregation didn't work. You know, I mean, we all learned from it. And if they ever bring it back, and I know that they won't, maybe we'll learn something else. But race relations are much better now than they were when I was a kid, because I'm from a very rural area in Alabama. And when I was a kid, you know, the segregation was still, you know, going on. This was before the civil rights movement. And so I had a lot of little white playmates that we couldn't do things together. We couldn't go to the movies together. And that impacted me a lot as I got older, because they wanted to be with me and I wanted to be with them. We couldn't understand why the adults didn't want us to be kids and to have relationships that we didn't have to hide. And so segregation brought us to where we are today, I think. And, you know, as far as the homosexuality mentioned in the book, that's a big part of the story. You know, back then it was illegal. Thank God it's not illegal now. And that the gay community, because I have a lot of gay readers, a lot of gay friends, a lot of gay relatives, and they have a very loud and a very strong voice now. And I think that if we're true to ourselves, people will respect us more, even if you're not what they want you to be or not what they think you should be. So we've learned a lot over the past 100 years or the last 20 years.
I think you all kind of tackle that in each of your books that I read, you know, about trying to be true to yourself. What piece of advice would you give to people today so that they honor who they truly are?
Well, don't start a relationship, or don't start off with something that's based on a lie, like my characters did. You know, they couldn't focus on their marriage because they were so busy trying to keep their deceptions and their lives going. And in the end, it almost destroyed them both and all the people that they loved. And so they ended up regretting it. They confessed certain things to each other. Even Jessie, who's told her husband, "Oh, I don't have anything to confess." And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she still wasn't being true to herself or to her husband. And so once they got together and sat down and discussed everything that they were doing wrong, it was a new beginning for this married couple. And I'm not saying that every married couple should sit down and make a list of all the things that they're doing wrong. That doesn't work. But I think it's important for you to be as open and as honest as possible. Even if you're not happy about your confessions or whatever, you still need to do it. You know, I think if you want to have a good relationship with your peers, your mate and your friends and your relatives and neighbors and so forth.
Anybody else have thoughts on, you know, how to honor being true to yourself?
Well, I'm a big therapy fan.
I am too.
I'm divorced twice. I think Mary's really hit it. I mean, and I guess I sort of want to bring it back to what our subject is. To a certain extent, it's the job of every writer and every reader. I always have to think, is this true? Is this observation true? Is it authentic even something dumb like we're going to look at the moon. If the character looks at the moon, it has to be the way that character would look at the moon. So a detective might look at the moon and say it's round as a bullet hole, to try to see something with new eyes and really, really look at it anew as you never have before. Then you're really, for me as an author, I'm being true to what I write, regardless of relationships or anything. I'm trying to write something that's really true so that it feels true to a reader. And I think we all have the experience when we read, we go, oh my God, that happened to me. Oh, I know just what she did. Right? And that's what the joy of books, that connection, but it only happens if you say something true. So you could be divorced twice, let's just say hypothetically speaking, but still try to write something really true. That's the extent of my advice.
Well, I think as readers and as authors, we're basically slipping into the skin of these characters. And so it's important that when we do that, it feels natural, it feels organic to that character. And that's, for me, part of the passion and love affair I have with reading is that ability that it can kind of transport me from my daily life and take me on this adventure that I would never have the opportunity, to embark on in another situation, or take me back in time so that I can learn something from the past. So I think really wanting our characters to be resonant so that readers can fully be immersed and enjoy that experience is so important. And one thing, I'm always kind of working on in those little details like the moon and how, someone might look at it differently, I think are really key to conveying that to readers.
I think there's something so, really enlightening about creating these characters who you think that maybe, like they live in a very different world to us, but we can really feel for them and we can really like feel their experience still. Like we're not all going to be a 1950s wife in a small rural town in France married to a baker, but we can understand kind of, feel unloved or feel in pain or kind of want to get to something beyond your life or kind of have a craving for beauty and for excitement. These are all things I think we can feel. And yeah, to kind of like transport those from a different time to now and to take people there is, it's really exciting for me, especially as historical fiction for me, it's a new genre because I normally kind of write speculative. So exciting process.
In terms of like being true to yourself, I think like at least in Nocturne, my character Grace like really goes through a lot of trials to hang on to what she wants, and she's kind of going along with what other people want. So like standing up for yourself, I think is really important, even when you feel very constrained by like outside forces.
Absolutely. That's the beautiful gift as writers that you give to us readers is, I think Catherine says it in your book, Chanel, that there's a freedom and excitement of slipping into other personas, pretending to be somebody you're not. And I think there's they always talk about reading and people who read have more empathy. And I think it's because we're able to, as I think Lisa said, or one of you said, slip into that character to understand how they see the world, how they understand how they see and experience those emotions. And 9 times out of 10, it resonates with somebody, that they feel that same way they feel seen inside of a book. And it is such a gift that you were able to give us as readers. So like as librarians and educators, I just want to say thank you for that. Sometimes we read to escape, and then sometimes we read to feel seen, and then we read to learn maybe how that person is handling that particular experience. So it is a beautiful gift that you give us all as readers. So I'm going to ask Sophie a question, because as a librarian, right, Elodie's comment, I have always been an archivist. I just lost my thought. Sorry, hold on. This is technology. When it works, it's great. I've always been an archivist, glutting myself on what has been left behind. So one of the things that's interesting about writing about the past is what is left behind and who wrote what was left behind, right? So to Alyssa's point earlier, is there a counterpoint to that point in history? Is there somebody else who has that alternative perspective? So can you talk a little bit about your research process and what perspectives were available and then what we're missing as that counterpoint?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question for me because, yeah, like I just said, historical fiction is a new genre, and actually like having to do research. Well, obviously I always research, but having to really do more specific research about a true event is quite a new experience because I'm kind of used to making up my own world entirely. And because I wrote it during the pandemic, I mean, I started writing it in January 2020. So I had all this research planned. I was going to go spend some time in France. I was going to go visit the town and like see everything for myself and kind of really experience it. And I obviously wasn't able to do any of that. So I kind of had to change my tack a bit. And so my research was kind of all from like text and from articles, and there wasn't actually that much about the event. The main text is kind of a really large, quite academic book, which is about 1,000 pages in French, and I don't speak French. Me, that was, and also, you know, it was the cultural history of bread, and only a little bit about the poisoning. So I was kind of working with a lot of blind areas. I kind of just found what I could, but like you said, there was all this space around the event. And I kind of think of historical writing in terms of like historical speculation. I like to think of it because, you know, there's a lot of things you can imagine if, like, I don't know what truly happened in that town. There are all these theories, it's never been solved. So for that kind of historical speculation, it felt really ripe for me to kind of, kind of think around the story, not just to tell the story, but to think about a totally fictional person within that story and what would be her own story, not about the larger town, but, you know, it's very focused on her experience, her relationships. You know, it's almost like the poisoning becomes kind of incidental because she's almost not even like realizing it's happening herself. She's focused on her own story. So it was an interesting way of writing because I really did think it would, you know, from the beginning, I thought it would be a more faithful retelling, and I really wanted to do this research and kind of go and be there and find things out, but I had to kind of do what I could because of the pandemic, essentially. But it just turned into a different kind of book, and so that process was really different.
Do any of you others who have done some of the historical research, is there something that strikes you when you were doing your research about, you know, what was written versus what was missing? Because back during certain periods of history, only certain people were allowed to write. If you think about how the dictionary was created, right? And who had the authority to put those words in the dictionary, right? So the same thing happens with some of what's been written about in history. So do any of you want to talk a little bit about that?
It's a hard one, Jen.
One thing I want to add about research, people ask me all the time, well, how do you do your research? And I tell them I eavesdrop. You know, I never had enough money to travel around or to do anything. Thank God we have Google now, but I still have some elders who are still alive, who still remember what life was like during the 30s and even before. And so I sit down and I talk with them and I take notes, and sometimes they repeat themselves over and over and over. But when I can't get what I need, I go, thank God, to Google, or I will talk to someone else who's written a similar book. And I also get a lot of do research by reading other authors' novels, not to copy or to plagiarize or anything like that. But if they're writing about a subject that's close to mine, then I can go and make sure that mine is authentic, because sometimes you get, you know, when you're talking to older people, you get like confused information or confusing information or something that's not completely accurate. And so it's good to just, you know, network. And so I do that a lot with authors and readers, librarians, and editors and so forth. I try to talk to as many people as possible when I'm starting on a new book.
I think that's a really good point. And I think I meant what I said, Jen. It's a hard question. And I think what's interesting when I was thinking about the answer for me is the truth is none of it's there. I mean, I guess I come from writing thrillers, and I thought, gee, I'll start writing historicals because I was interested in the subject matter. And I found out, honestly, that you're still writing about certain themes. For me, it's family and justice. And then what I started to realize a little bit is that we're all telling a story. We may be amateur historians, but we want to tell a story. So the fact is, nobody comes to us because they want to read history or get the study questions. They
Right.
want to learn something, but they want a story that will grab them. So what I finally realized is like, you know what? You have to have the underlying stuff right, and you basically educate yourself. You know, as you guys said, it's so interesting. Sophie was right on. I think it's so fun to really just immerse yourself in it, and then you synthesize it, and then you start, for me, and I know you guys do too, from square zero, because none of these people existed. They're all fictional,
Right,
and they
right.
have to be to make it be a compelling story. At least
That's
that's how and I just wanted to add, I thought Sophie said something so interesting too, with respect to, you know, calling it speculative. You know, I'm starting to not buy into the genres at all. So that, well, I was listening to Sophie's book, which sounds so fascinating. I can't wait to read all of you guys. And it's kind of like, is it a mystery? Is it a whodunit? Is it a whodunit? Is it a thriller? You know, everything is everything. And that's what's kind of great. I think historical fiction really gets that, because you're writing in history, but it is timeless. That's what I think.
Right.
Right? And it's like,
Right.
you said,
I agree.
it's universal themes that we're all looking for. And they come out of whole cloth.
I think that's the thing as librarians that, and Alyssa, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and anybody who's watching this will correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't really like the word genre. I mean, we know we have to use it so we can, for people who are self-directed, right? And when they come into the space, like imagine if like, I don't know, like a home improvement store didn't have categories of things, people would go nuts.
Yes.
Right? So there's something to be said, but most of the time when we're talking to readers, it's, you know, it's Nancy Pearl's words of, you know, are people reading for character? Are they reading for language? Are they reading for setting? Are they reading for plot? You know, are they reading, you know, so I think that's the thing that we really try to as librarians is capture the essence of what the person's in the mood for. And I can't say genres be darned, but to truly make that right connection for people. And that's, I think, what makes your book so special is that every one of you have these universal themes that I know exactly who, when they walk through the door, who to recommend that book to, right? And I think that you all make me look really good. So I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a great gift to be able to connect, you know, that reader with one of your books based on what it is that they're looking for. You know, I think otherwise, if you have a genre, it kind of doesn't allow people access to books that they would really enjoy because they get hung up on that label, right? Which is a whole other universal theme for another discussion and not the past tense. So let me ask Alyssa a question, if it's okay. Grace, you talked about her whole life from the time she's walking with her mom through the streets to run errands. She sees these ballet dancers, bound and determined one day she's going to be a ballet dancer. When she becomes a dancer, then she wants to be the prima ballerina, right? So she works super hard, extra long hours, extra rehearsals to achieve this goal. And when she does, she says, this can't be all there is. Right? Can you share your thoughts a little bit about this sentiment? And please tell me as a writer and a librarian that you have not experienced this.
No, I think, no, it's, so for me, like I approach this, I'm glad you brought this up because it's repeated a lot in the book actually, where she says this can't be all there is, because, you know, I think like, well, as an artist, you know, Grace is a ballerina. She also plays the violin, so she's a musician. And then, you know, as me as a writer, you're always going to be striving. Like you're never going to be satisfied because then you would just stop and that's it. So I think that's just kind of an inherent part of creating art, you know. But for Grace specifically, you know, she, like I said, she grew up in this bleak world of the 1930s, and ballet was like her escape from that. But then, you know, and she still feels that when she's dancing, you know, she still feels like she has to be in motion to kind of outrun death or outrun bad things happening to her. But then there's so much else going on around her that makes this dream not what she wanted it to be, you know, like her best friend is leaving the company. the ballet mistress, who she might hope to kind of be a nurturing mother figure, really isn't. And then she finds out, you know, this may be a little spoilery, but she finds out that she maybe didn't get this position based on her own merit, but because she has this mysterious patron. And that just kind of shatters her. So she's kind of looking for the next thing. So when the fantasy element starts to come in, she's kind of drawn away into this other escape, until it kind of builds and she has to, she's kind of forced to forge her own path so that she can be in a position to continue to strive and explore and discover, but on her own terms.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of people, they say with art, and you all are artists, art is never done, it's simply abandoned. Because I think left to your own devices, you would continue to tweak every single sentence, every single scene, right? Every single thing. So yeah, I think you're constantly striving, and thank goodness, because you know, my bookshelves, thank you, right? Chanel, let's talk a little bit about the two characters in your book, Catherine, Katie, and Elena, that during this time period, you chose to write about two incredibly strong, powerful, empowered women. Can you talk a little bit about why that's an important theme for you in your books?
It definitely is. I think we kind of all have core stories that we sort of keep coming back to as writers. And for me, that's definitely something that I love to explore in my writing. My first foray into historical fiction came when I wrote Nocturne in Havana. And in that, you know, I was really inspired by this idea of what happens when extraordinary events happen to kind of ordinary people, and looking at, you know, my grandmother's experiences in the Cuban Revolution and what it's like to go through kind of these personal dramas and experiences, while at the same time the world as you know it is sort of falling apart. And so with the Cuban Heiress, I was really drawn to the story of the Monroe Castle. It's a 1930s cruise liner that caught fire, and it was a round trip voyage from New York to Havana. And just imagining, you know, the people that would have been on that ship and what their lives would have been like. You know, you have the background of Prohibition just ending, the Great Depression is obviously going on, which Alyssa brought up such a great point about kind of how the 30s really, I think, impacted characters' lives and the sort of element that they were in at that time. And then in Cuba, you had the Cuban Revolution of 1933 that had just happened. So there's all of this turmoil. You have political violence, you have economic insecurity. And I really just wanted to look at, you know, these things that were certainly out of the characters' controls, the fire that breaks out on the ship, and what kind of the personal dramas that would be going on the ship at the same time, and what they could control. And, you know, and that's where I think the different genres really come into play, because you have so many different elements to life. You know, we have our emotional connections with our family, romantic connections, and then these overarching events that sort of come in and knock you a bit off your path, so to speak. And so that's really what I loved exploring in the Cuban Heiress. I think we see so much strength in characters, and particularly in women. I mean, women are often the ones who, we don't hear their narratives as much when we look at the historical record, but they're the ones that are taking care of children or elderly parents, or, you know, going through kind of some more unseen roles in history, and they often kind of get forgotten because maybe they're not on the front lines of the battle, or whatever, you know, the narrative may be. And so I think honoring the role that they play, the important role that they play, the courage that they show, and kind of celebrating that and being inspired by that is so important in our work. And it's something I definitely love to explore. So with these two fictional characters, I got to kind of give these women agency that is absolutely in the historical record, but we don't see highlighted as often as we should when we're doing research and when we hear, you know, about these accounts. So it's something I'm very passionate about and that I kind of keep coming back to in my work.
That's great. And I have to comment, I have family who lives in Ocean Grove, which is right next to Asbury Park. And I was in Asbury Park in September for the big See Here Now concert, and did not know as I'm walking down the boardwalk that there was a shipwreck until I read your book this week. So I love seeing that stuff come to life. So now I'm going to look at that space a little bit differently, and I'm going to have really cool stories to tell them right? To become even more interested in it. We have about 10 minutes left, so I thought I'd go around and ask all of you, right? Because you wrote about past tense. What time period would you love to go back to and why?
Can I answer that first? Because people laugh when I admit, that if I could go back in time, I'd go back to biblical days. I would want a friend like Delilah, Eve, and some of the strong women that we read about. That they're fictionalized them now. But I would love to go back and have a cool friend like Delilah. And some of the guys were pretty cool too.
Absolutely. Sophie?
I feel like mine is kind of cheesy and kind of teenage, but I'd love to go back to like 1960s, 1970s New York and kind of just like be involved in, like Greenwich Village and the whole literary scene and go to these amazing parties at like, like with Andy Warhol and stuff. I was just thinking it sounds so glamorous, and I kind of will totally eat up any book sort of set in that era and get really excited by it. So I would love to go back to that.
Absolutely. Chanel?
I think for me, I would love to go back to pre-revolutionary Cuba, just because I grew up hearing so much of kind of those memories of exile. And, I felt like I kind of walked with my grandparents on some of the streets, the way they would describe things. And so having that experience, for myself would be really cool. I think I keep trying to recreate that with my books a little bit, to imagine what it must have been like for them. But they spoke of it with such love, and to kind of go back to something we talked to earlier, loyalty. And so I definitely always kind of harken back to that.
Oh, that's awesome. Alyssa?
I think I would really love to go visit Italy during the Renaissance. I, like Lisa, I'm also Italian American, and I just like love learning about Italian history. And I think it would be so cool to visit when there was this really powerful family, the Medicis, when they were in power. Because like art was flourishing and the city was flourishing, and I think that would be such a cool time to visit.
Absolutely. Lisa? Don't say it's a hard question, please.
Jen, I flunked. I'm going to flunk this question. I'm going to give you, we did the truth panel, so I'm going to tell you that I'm going to be true to myself. I love it now. I would never go back. I love, first off, I'm a woman alone. I got a couple of dogs, a cat, a couple of chickens. I just don't think it was so great for us back then. I don't know if I could have my life back then. I know that I probably couldn't. And I also love, on the positive side, I love that we're doing this. I love the richness of this culture. I love that we're enabled by the technology. I love that I can meet all these new author friends, and you too, and whoever is listening to this, and there's so much more available. I go to web, we mentioned this before, but I think it makes some sense here. I watched a webinar about Elena Ferrante. I'm just a lady in my house in the suburbs, and I'm supposed to be working, but I was like, oh, I like her. I want to learn about her. And here was this whole symposium of all of Ferrante's translators, and they were all in one place, all around the world. And I thought, what a time we live in. And it's not just the technology per se, it's that the technology enables the connection between people. And I'm a little lonely. And I kind of like that I have that connection. I like that I have readers' connection. I love that the world is more open to people who may be on their own than it was previously. So I ain't going anywhere. and since I'm probably the oldest on this panel, I can tell you that, the 70s, like I was in high school in the 70s. So historical fiction for me is alive because it's like my past. I love history, but I also love what it says so much about the present. I just love, and I'm so grateful that I'm alive now.
It's ironic you mentioned that, because in last week's New York Times, there was an article about how many people are over 50 that are living alone, and how things have come through with technology, which allows us, I know I'm almost there, but that we're wired for connection, right? And technology allows us to develop those connections, right? So that we feel, part of something, kind of feel this group here, I kind of found my tribe.
But
You guys
apropos the
also-
connection, the real low-tech connection is a novel.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
We all know that. We all read them. We know it.
Absolutely. If any of you could take a road trip with one of the characters from your book, which one would you take a road trip with and why?
I would choose my character, Jesse's retarded adult son, because his innocence just made me smile every time I wrote a line for him. You know, the fact that he, you know, thinks his mother looks like a horse, and that she's very pretty because the horse is pretty, and so his mom is pretty. That kind of innocence, it just, I don't know, it does something to me. So I would love to just drive cross country with somebody that innocent.
And see the world through their eyes.
Through
right?
their eyes, right.
Well said, Miss Mary. Sophie.
I kind of think Violet, who's not the character, the main character, LG is the main character who kind of narrates the novel, but Violet is a woman she gets very obsessed with, and she's very glamorous and she's quite manipulative. But I don't know why, but I feel like she would just kind of be quite good, like fun to be on a road trip with. I think she would kind of be up for doing some like crazy adventures, but you wouldn't be able to like totally trust her. She might sort of like leave with the car in the night. But I think it would be just a glamorous trip with someone who could make you feel very alive. But the kind of the payoff is that you're never quite sure if you can actually trust them. But maybe that would be fun.
I think Catherine would be a lot of fun for my book. She's definitely someone who is kind of determined to change her station in life, and she's adventurous and very bold. I'm much quieter than my characters often, so I always kind of look up to them for the way that they kind of go for what they want, and they're so kind of unafraid to be themselves.
Alyssa.
So I would choose my main character's Grace, her best friend, Amelia, because she's just like very kind. She's always there for Grace. She's really the best friend that you want to have. And I kind of based her and Grace's friendship off of me and my own friend. So I want to just take my own friend along with me.
Lisa, who would you take?
For me, it would be, there's two characters in the book that are twins. One's sort of a naughty and one's less, and one's good. And I think it was easier to write the more villainous one, because the guy I really want to be with is the better one. You know, that he feels a very strong calling to God. I'm not particularly religious, but I think I'm kind of spiritual, and for justice. And he works for it every day of his life. Every day he is trying to do the right thing against insurmountable odds. And I thought Chanel said something was so interesting and made so much sense to me, because when she talked about her heroines, that they are kind of inspiring as a person, as a woman. You know, he inspired me that you can always be better, do better, give more, reach more, and higher. That's something I really have tried to put into practice since I've written him. I honestly think it's something librarians do every damn day, right? and our hats are off to you for it. I mean, like I started saying, I didn't have any books in the house. And I think I always like to remind librarians that you don't know who's walking in the door of your library and what is their home life is like. They may not be as fortunate, or they may have a lot of money, but not a lot of books or whatever. And what libraries give them is a place for their imagination and a place to belong. For me, I never forgot my library card, because I felt, as you said, Jen, I felt seen in a library, and I still do. So thank you for that. I really, you're in line with Gaetano in my book. You are doing good every day.
Yeah, thank you. And for all of us librarians and educators who are watching, you know, thank you for that. I think to your point, I never know who's walking through the door. And I had somebody give me a great piece of advice. You never know what they're coming from, and you don't know what they're going to. But I guarantee you, when they're in front of me in the library, I will see them and I will hear them every time. And I believe my colleagues watching will say the same exact thing. And someday they might end up on a panel, right? And it just, you know, it's a bucket list item for me. So you all are absolute gems. I want to thank you all for taking time to join us this afternoon. Thank you to all the librarians and educators joining us today. And next up on the agenda is our afternoon keynote with actor and author Max Greenfield. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.